Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Art of Halo Infinite panel and Q&A. My name is Braden, and I will be moderating this panel. I'd like to thank our 6 guests for taking the time out of their schedules to be with us here today. And thank you guys, the audience, for joining us on Twitch. We'd love to hear where our fans are from, so feel free to put in the chat where you're tuning in from. It's great to be here today with the concept art team over at 343 Industries, and I'm sure all of you are very excited to hear what they have to say. I do want to mention that the Art of Halo Infinite art book is available for pre-order on our website. It'll feature a signed book plate of everyone attending the panel here today. You can find the link to the product page for the book below. Now, before we get started, if anyone in our audience has any questions about the art direction and visual design of Halo Infinite during the presentation, please feel free to drop them into the chat. During the Q&A section after the presentation, we'll do our best to go through and answer as many as we can with however much time we have available. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce each of our panelists. We have with us today Nicholas Sparth-Bouvier. He is art director at 343 Industries for Halo Infinite. And then we have associate art director Darren Bacon, and then senior concept artist Ben Morrow, senior concept artist Glenn Israel, senior concept artist David Heidhoff, and concept artist Molly McLaughlin. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Sparth. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Braden. So a small disclaimer, this was the best time for me to actually hold a panel. Well, I literally have Bob the Builder like repairing my roof. So if you hear hammers, it's like right now, it's a bit of a nice surrounding sound. And we were joking about the fact it should just be considered like machine shot, like gun machine shots, like in a full immersive Halo experience on the battlefield. That being said, I'm going to be going straight to sharing my screen and be able to just give me 1 second. There it is. In theory, this should be working fine, right? So basically, it's a very hard challenge to be able to condense like a full, game experience, like and a full visual experience, like in such a short amount of time. So there's a lot of condensed information we want to be talking about. So I'll just really like jump straight into what we have been doing. And you see the word pre-production just written down right there, down on that image. What is pre-production? For the people who don't know, in the video game industry, slangy terms, we use the pre-prod term as the first period of time in which we have and concept art they have a lot of freedom when it comes to concept artists, art directors, narrative directors that are going to be expressing ideas on paper. What is the game going to be about, and everything connected to the first intent, and as a result, the concept artists and the people that are going to be making all these visual for real are going to be the ones jumping on the pre-prod side. So as a result, what I did is that I gathered quite a few concepts from the pre-production era of Halo Infinite. And obviously, there's a ton of things. We had to choose from literally, and I'm not exaggerating, like hundreds and thousands sometimes of images when it comes to everything that has been done on Infinite. And I think it was good for that panel. We really all agreed that it would be really fun to just like dig into these folders and look at how the sausages are done, if I might say, when it comes to everything connected to the game. So that being said, let's just go straight into it. Pre-production, as you can see like the premises of like a huge ring, the presence of right now on that concept, like something very connected to Unity bases and stuff. Obviously, again, because a pre-production is really just not that specific into the universes we're going to be conveying. There's a lot of things going on. It goes in all directions. It's actually the freedom time for us to be able to expand on a lot of ideas and things that are specifically not going to make it into the game sometimes, because there's just so much going on to be able to just like funnel everything to like a very definite and specific final intent. You need to actually create a lot of stuff, and this is what we have been doing. As you can see here, these are very, very early concepts. You know, you can already see some of the foundation that we have in Infinite at the end, connected to verticality and the vertical world going on when it comes to a final Zeta Halo, for example. Again, it's like filled with, you know, pre-production is filled with all these periods where it's all about discovery. You know, it's all about discovering all these visuals that are going to be making, you know, instilling the DNA of what's going to be coming next. And sometimes very different and very distant from what you would expect in game, which is, you know, something normal again. And I know that, you know, we're always talking about the variety and the versatility of a game. And it's always like something that is very challenging because of technical constraints, because of production time. But, you know, it's true that pre-production is a bit of a fun era in which anything goes, as you can see. And it doesn't need to even be very complex. Sometimes it's just like ideas thrown in, like a concept like this one. It's just like, you know, it's like a very fast composition, just a few brushworks here and there to kind of express ideas when it comes to some pitches we've done, some of the first trailers we've done, and all these things are just like right there, just like, you know, in a lot of folders that are not always going to see the light of day. And again, the fun stuff about these folders and about these concepts is that a lot of it is just like sort of unfinished. There's a lot of things we don't present. There's a lot of things that are just like not needed to be like appearing and pushed into even like the final art book, because again, the pre-production period has been like really very extended. So as a result, we have tons of material to be able to work with. And I'm putting this because it really has to do also about style. What I mean is that on the concept art team, and this is something that, you know, for a lot of people working in the industry, when it comes to concept artists, truly there's, you know, a lot of concept artists, when they arrive into a new project, it's like, hey, how am I going to be working and adapt to a style that is pre-existing? And it's true, there's always a lot of constraints of Halo when it comes to the very specific style we have for a game that needs to be unified and cohesive. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that concept artists are not going to come with their own style languages. And sometimes sometimes, most of the time, and close to 100% of the time, we want to have that variety. And this is a fun exercise where you have very similar subjects right now on screen, but left and right are treated like graphically in a very different way. We can use line works, we can use like painted and rendered imagery. What I mean is that there's a bit of a world of acceptance when it comes to each artist input, as you are going to see with all the concept artists are going to be talking about it right now. And again, you know, I'm just like sewing through good and fun art through the years, and this is what it's all about. So there's not always a lot that needs to be said about this. It really has to just be shown, as I'm just like doing right now. And as you can see, it goes into many, many different directions. And to finish about, you know, with that pre-prod era, because again, there's tons of art, so I'm going fast on that. This is one of the one of the concepts that really just resonated and rang a bell when it comes to having a bit of that broken Zeta Halo environment, where we knew we wanted to have a bit of that vertical repetitive environment when it comes to how do we rebuild a ring, how do the Forerunner is just like, and all the structure is just going to be reconstructing itself. And sometimes it just comes from a few brush strokes like you can see on this. But some of these ideas with just like these vertical cast shadows and these very, very specific vertical lines, there's a lot of things that it just resonates, you know, it's just fun stuff. Now, I'm just going to jump straight to the pillars. Obviously, again, this is a very condensed version of all the pillars that we've been working on. Legacy is a very straightforward one. Legacy, what is it? You know, it's, again, there's tons of conversations about what we've done in the past, and Halo 4, Halo 5, why did we just do what we did, and we could like literally write a book about the whole thing. What I just want to really precise is that, again, all the directions we've done on Halo Infinite it had never been anything about bashing or just like literally crushing down any past projects, especially when it comes to Halo 4 and 5, that we stand super proud with everything we've done in the past. It's just that a game franchise is always very organic and needs to adapt to a lot of different needs and a lot of different expectations. And into that context, it was a no-brainer for me, for the teams, for the creative director to actually be able to just like propose like a very different universe that can be reconnected to the foundation of what Halo was. So legacy is one of them. The simplification that I've introduced as a pillar has to do with what I call the basic visual design principles, which are principles to just make sure that we actually present a clear game from a visual standpoint. The oriented military weapons is a pillar that is connected to the fact that at one point in Halo, because we are talking about the future and it's a science fiction space opera franchise, I wanted to make sure that the weapons of Halo might still be relatable for the players to play with and to just shoot with. As a result, it's a fact that sometimes these science fiction features were sometimes a bit too prevailing, and these weapons would just be a bit less relatable. I just made sure that we would have a bit of a strict identification to the military world that might just be a bit more clear compared to past games. And obviously, and this, Ben and other of you guys will just develop on that, there's a return to classic Forerunner aesthetics connected to architecture, an architecture representation that would just be a bit more minimal, a bit more like slightly more massive, and reconnected to a surfacing philosophy connected to ornaments, connected to patterns, and connected to a lot of DNA coming from the past. So all that stuff that Ben and also Glenn will talk about will just be presented for you right now. These are coming from all the slides that I've been working on through the years. As you can see, left more like a Halo 5, Halo 4 philosophy, something a bit more spherical, a bit less related to function. How do we bring that into something that's going to be a bit more industrial, far more connected to like an industrial background that just makes a bit more sense into a bit of nowadays vision. Simplification has to do also with removing pipes and removing objects whenever they are not going to be useful for the flow and for the distinct, the reading of the object. So this is one of the examples. And again, I'm going fast on all that because there's a lot. Like flowing, when it comes to map in MP, or even when it comes to specific levels in campaign, how do we install like a clear identification of flowing? These documents, like the one you have right now, are very much connected to level design and how do we read spaces in which you are. It is very important to actually have very distinct map areas in any maps at any point to make sure that we have a great gameplay. So all these art intents are here to participate and be complementary to gameplay to make sure that you have the best experience ever. And I brought this one out of a very deep hidden folder. On top, you have Kenneth Scott's paint over that he did like quite a while ago. And it's true that, so we try to bring that in and say, hey, we still have some of that DNA, but how do we simplify it? How do we declutter the surfacing, the walls, and the UNSCI aesthetic? So this was one of the files that I wanted to put forward for this. Silhouettes with some of the weapons, the VACA on the right side, for example. VACA was just one of the names we had in pre-production. The interesting thing here is that you see that there's a bit of a harsher silhouette compared to what we had on Halo 5, finding a very military-oriented experience here. And that's one of the files we're using for that, done by Glenn on the right side. Same when it comes to specifically the Hydra. The Hydra is one of the final weapons we have in our game. On top, you can see the Hydra from Halo 5, a bit more bubbly, a bit more spherical. There's just more going on in a very science fiction oriented vocabulary. We brought that back into something that might be, again, more military relatable. And Glenn did that final version on the right side again. I just love that weapon and the attention to detail. So we walk back and forth a lot. You have, for example, a painter I did on the left side, and Glenn actually just like brought all that stuff to completion with like a lot of amazing finishing touches. Same when it comes to that sheet. I brought it into that specific doc because I wanted to show that the crazy attention to details to make sure that we have the perfect modeling, like the perfect help and the perfect contribution when it comes to all the modeling needs. And again, finishing with the sidekick. Interestingly, I brought this one in also because, as you can see, we wanted to have a relatable pistol, but slowly we realized that we have gone too far into something a bit more generic. You have the final one on the right side. We just added a very classic Halo features, as you guys know. And as a result, we had a small weapon that was very identified as very Halo looking. Forerunner aesthetics, I'm just putting that into my deck specifically to show the attention to surfacing details. And this was just the joint work with Ben. And again, Halo, the past Halos were actually a bit more simple when it comes to surfacing and Forerunner. So I wanted to make sure that we would veer back into a very texturing and ornament-centric philosophy when it comes to what we're going to do on the Forerunner aesthetic. Same when it comes to this, is just to show a bit of that intent. Finally, Master Chief, and I wanted to just have a bit of a discussion about Master Chief as a very evolutive product, and where obviously there's been a lot going on and a lot of changes through the years. The initial idea with Master Chief was we knew we were going to be going for a change, but we were not exactly knowing about the amount of change we're going to be having for Master Chief, which is, are we going to be organically taking from Halo 5 and Halo 4 and try to slightly change the shapes and find a way to just like make it a bit simpler, make it a bit more readable? We would go back into something a bit more green and a bit more identifiable to the fans. The thing though is that at one point we said, hey, best would be to really like have like readopt like some of the features of the past to the point where we slowly let go on the Halo 5 and Halo 4 features, and we said we are going to fully borrow from the DNA of the first Halo games, and this is what we did. But I'm still putting that in there because, as you see, there was a lot of merging and a lot of fusion with all the work and all the focus we've had on Master Chief. A lot of work done with the readability, the silhouettes. How do we simplify? How do we also have a slight less textures at first, because we wanted to just really focus on silhouetting and colors and all that. This is stuff I've dug. I was just digging into the folders and find all these transitions that are very connected to a back and forth between modeling, prototyping, and concept art, because these are what these documents are. These are very evolving JPEGs that are like being thrown back and forth between all these contributors. And again, it has to do with small changes and incremental changes in each area: limbs, helmet, feet, every type of feature that you see here, shoulder cans, shoulder pads, and all these features slowly evolving into a final result. Well, I work with Colby Jukes a lot, a phenomenal modeler that actually modeled Master Chief, and we worked together for many months to make sure that we were going to be having the best results out of Master Chief. And as you can see here, these are working documents. We look at each scale, it's small dimensions and all that stuff, and we just like throw these files back and forth again to make sure that we achieve like the best results, with also the ubiquitous like paint over, and the paint over is also a huge part of our jobs when it comes to doing this, which is a modeler prototypes like a specific section. Concept artist just comes on top, repaints on top, finds new shapes languages like you can see on the arm on the right side. And all these things go back and forth again and again and again. It can take weeks, it can take months, but at the end, what happens is that you can have a very substantial and a very achieved model that will just be englobing and encompassing everything we wanted to be doing for Master Chief. Daniel Chavez actually did that final sheet. That is a huge help for modeler. It was here to make sure that we would model everything in the best way. We always keep track of all these small details, and we have these big final, very rendered sheets where every edge, every bevel is just like being treated in the best way possible. There will always be discussions with modelers to make sure that it would just be at the top of the result that is expected, but these files help a lot. And I'm going to finish with just like 2 images. One is, we as a franchise, we also need everything and the connected to the marketing arts, to franchise needs, to consumer products. As a result, we do a lot of that stuff too in the concept art team. This is just like one of the many paintovers we did for the box art, for example, working with the marketing teams to make sure that, and publishing, to make sure that we would express the game the best. And the people that know the games the best are us when it comes to the visuals, specifically the visuals. So we had a lot of contributions on that front. And this is one of these paintovers that I found back into these folders. And finally, I'll finish with the Colby Jukes model image. So this, from a modeling standpoint, was close to what we wanted to have when we put the Starry Night pose on that model, that Colby did that, and that we just had turnarounds, and we saw the whole thing and we said, okay, we have the best balance we want to have for the new Master Chief. There will be, after that, quite a few phases of work, as you may guess, when it comes to texturing, surfacing, and a lot of tidbitty details that I can't mention right now, but still, the final result, we had it on that specific model. And I was super proud of everything that Colby and all of us had done. So basically, you have here a bit of that evolution of Master Chief from the pre-prod era to the final product. And that's about it for my section. And I'll just like hand the continuation to Glenn.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep. Let me stop sharing. Oop.
All right, hello. My name is Glenn Israel. I'm a senior concept artist here at 343 Industries. And I'm going to briefly talk about the legacy and the way that we use style guides on Halo Infinite. So I began working on Halo in 2008 as a concept artist on Halo ODST and Reach. If you think about it, that means that I've worked on Halo in a production capacity probably longer than any other human being on Earth. And that's kind of left me in a good position to serve as a kind of visual librarian for our legacy. Broadly speaking, by legacy, I mean these core 5 Halo games, starting with Halo Combat Evolved and ending with Halo Reach. In visual terms, when I say legacy, I'm talking specifically about the styles that we inherited from these games. Style can be thought of as a kind of design language, and the signature elements that make up that style are kind of its vocabulary. So a style guide is essentially a visual dictionary. It explains and illustrates what elements go where and why. So, for example, when I started working on the Forerunner architectural style guide, I started with literally thousands of screenshots and concepts from the Halo Index, which is an internal resource that we have that catalogs literally everything Halo that's been created over the last 20 years. Now, we knew that understanding the language of this reference was essential to accomplish the kind of legacy goals that we'd established for the project. So I began by grouping these images by theme and type. And as I went through the images, I was looking for the signature elements that kind of defined this design language. These would be the kind of design cues and motifs that are common to multiple points of reference. I was also looking for images that I knew from the lore and from playing the games implied function or purpose or meaning in these structures. So as that last group narrowed down to this group, for example, 2 signature elements emerged. Definitive angles, which is kind of the specific and distinct way that angled shapes and forms are used in Forerunner architecture. And this concept of masts and sails, if you look at these images, they all have sort of a strong vertical that creates or implies a mast like you'd see on a sailing ship. And then they all have a different kind of sail, or one of two types actually. These shapes actually imply function that's familiar from the lore and gameplay, and that the tall and steep sails are generally associated with structures that communicate with other structures elsewhere on a ring, whereas the broad and wide but kind of shallow angled sails generally are associated with control over the local environment. So how is this information used? Well, it can be used to inform the creation of new assets, or it can also test whether an asset that already exists sort of fits within the style as we're in the direction that we're trying to drive it. So we can look at this example on the right. This is a tower created by Ben Morrow, and it exhibits both of these signature elements. You can see the use of definitive angles in both the form and the detail throughout the structure. And it also has this strong vertical mast with a very tall and steep sail, implying that it's a communication structure, which is in fact its intended purpose in Halo Infinite. So all told, I ended up finding 21 separate signature elements that I compiled into a document like this. So these are guidelines that are intended to teach the language to everybody on the team who's going to be either designing or building these assets. From a very broad level, it's safe to say that the more of these elements you include in a composition or design, the more Forerunner it's going to appear. But we try not to think of these as rules. The hope is that once you have an understanding of them, you'll be able to bend or break them creatively as the style evolves. So for a style guide to be successful, it must be accessible. It has to, like I mentioned before, it has to teach the signature elements of the style so that everyone up and down the production line can make informed decisions from concept to execution. The hope is that it allows us to create spaces like these, which in this screenshot alone exhibits 9 of the 21 signature elements. So we went through a similar process for the UNSC. In the core canon, there are fewer examples of distinct UNSC architecture. So this style guide ended up having fewer signature elements, a total of 7, of which these 3 are an example. But it was also an opportunity for us to emphasize that the style guide is a living document. New content could be added as it was created. So as you can see at the top, we have sort of the signature elements and then legacy examples of that. And then below, new infinite concepts where those elements have been sort of highlighted or surrounded. And then we would use compositions like these to highlight the common use of signature elements between legacy concepts and infinite concepts, such as in these 2 interiors with the legacy asset on the left. Or we could use these compositions to show how these signature elements can adapt to new scales or situations, as shown as in these 4 exteriors with the infinite concepts on the right. The hope is that this shows that even with a limited vocabulary, a coherent design language emerges that feels both familiar and new and allows us to create spaces like this. This is an MP map in Infinite called Launch Site, which calls back to Reach in its theme, but features all new detail and all but one of the signature elements in the style guide. So the last one that I'm going to go into is the Banished style guide. And so in the core shooter canon, this is actually kind of a new style. And it began as a collection of potential design theories, kind of exploring what was possible. These initial experiments were sort of combinations of our inspirations and varied from graphic design to photo reference to early pre-production concept like that shown on this middle row created by David Heidhoff. This process evolved to incorporate more information from the legacy. As you can see on the left, borrowing and examining design elements from Halo 2, 3, Reach, and then also starting to grab elements from Halo Wars 2 and incorporate the continuing pre-production work that David was doing on the right. This process went on for weeks, if not months, and resulted in a plethora of ideas that we liked in theory, but didn't necessarily feel like we'd landed in execution. And there were many more that we just discarded as the technology and narrative evolved on the project. But we eventually landed on a document, a living document that looked like this, that is based on that foundational work that David and Nick did, and was further developed and refined by Martin DeChambeau and the rest of the concept team. Essentially, these are 8 signature elements that were defined and continually updated as imagery got approved and came online. And that allowed us to create spaces like this, which is the Redoubt of Suffering in the Halo Infinite campaign, and a prime example of the Banished style in the game. And also, again, features all but one of the style's signature elements. So that's kind of a high-level look at the foundational work for this. I'm going to hand off to Ben Morrow now to do a deeper dive into his work on the Forerunner style.
Thanks, Glenn. Let me get my screen share up. I think, is that working? Yeah.
Don't see it yet.
Not yet.
All right. Sorry, my Zoom's acting up again. Okay, is it working now?
Nope, not yet. We can see that you're all sharing something, but it's not the deck yet.
Yeah, I might just have to retry it one more time.
Does it look like Ben froze?
Yeah, I think Ben had froze. Oh,
Sorry,
back.
Zoom is crashing again. Let me try just the screen. Hold on. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay,
does.
sharing PowerPoint crashed it. Sharing screen. Okay,
You made
I
it.
was a I was a senior concept artist on the game, and I really went into like heavy on the Forerunner stuff, and yeah, excited to share more stuff that Sparth and Glenn covered on a higher level. So this was probably my first week on the job, was tasked with exploring and designing these giant Forerunner spires that would be all around the ring. And so these were the ideas that would potentially evolve over time as the ring became more activated and the player would have to shut these down. And we refined 2 of these for the final game, like the base one and then a more evolved one. And this is how they ended up in the final game. And so what Glenn and Sparth were indicating was we tried to come up with some ideas to like help analyze what was done in the past and come up with not necessarily rules, but things that we felt were working and things we could communicate with different team members to start putting into Forerunner designs of the games. And these were just some things that I came up with, or I understood or saw were working in the past that I loved, and just some mental notes I took that could obviously be broken when needed, but helped me start getting the general DNA that we were after, keeping very interesting architectural spaces when we design interior spaces and exterior spaces, avoiding anything that's too like boxy or simple, which might lean more into UNSC or other themes at other factions in the game. And so taking some of those principles in mind and some of the things that Glenn mentioned, started exploring some new Forerunner structures we could have in the game. And this was one of the early successes I feel that Sparth and everyone really responded to. And I felt it kept a lot of interesting elements that I loved in early Halo games, but helped adapt it into more modern classic Forerunner that we were completing in the game, and using some reference from the older Halos that we all felt were working, and trying to update the legacy Forerunner in a tasteful and respectful way. And this is where that tower ended up in the final game. Another thing I wanted to do was, as we were starting to expand this idea out further to the rest of the project and the team, we were just thinking of ways we could potentially not always have to like explain what we were thinking, but potentially having building blocks that the rest of the team members could use. So if they started blocking out levels and all these kinds of things, it would have that DNA within the pieces they were using. So I came up with an early kind of like Forerunner kit bash set, creating shapes and 3D elements based off the legacy architectural shapes and graphic design shapes and the patterns, which I felt were extremely strong. And so we started to assemble some of these into some of the early spaces that we were testing for, like what would a Halo Infinite Forerunner interior look like. And you can see below was one of those early tests, which Sparth and I went back and forth on to kind of see what we might be able to achieve and do for Halo Infinite, and just driving home the pattern heavy application of Forerunner patterns and these kind of strong, almost cathedral religious feeling spaces that were big themes in the early games. Even going so far as to like create new Forerunner patterns and textures that I felt could maybe carry on some of the themes that were in the old games, while also using some of the earlier patterns and graphic design language that were working in the old games. Same thing for hallways, trying to think about what would a Halo Infinite Forerunner Legacy looking hallway look like, and these were some early tests and where we went on the right in the final game. This was an early blockout for the room we see in the E3 trailer from a couple years ago. The final in E3, we didn't have these spinning slabs, but it was cool that in the final we actually, when you get to the space in the game, there are these kind of spinning DNA slabs. So it was cool to see some early ideas that initially we didn't use but ended up using in the end. Again, just early explorations for what the space could look like, how we might apply these legacy themes into the new game, and working out with the team back and forth like how we could apply these patterns and textures over early screenshots, back and forth with Sparth to push the space in an interesting direction. I think Sparth showed the earlier version of this, but then some of the paint over he did was punching out these walls and really pushing the space to create a more epic space that will be much more interesting in the game and for the players. This was a device that Chief goes up to when you get into that room, and I think this was one of the early successes that we all felt like, wow, something's working here. And once the 3D department built this out, and it just had a really nice feeling to it that I feel helped inform a lot of the other things we finalized later. Again, some earlier concepts for this space from the E3 trailer that Sparth and I went back and forth on, and where that ended up in the final trailer for E3 a few years ago. Some other applications and sketches for Forerunner architecture, other Forerunner architectural pieces that you see throughout the ring, exploring interesting ideas and things that the player could come across while exploring the new Halo in Infinite. Applying these ideas into more underground spaces that the player would explore, different bridgeways and different interiors and things. This was also another early space that we felt was working well, and getting the kind of balance between legacy looking forms and heavy pattern application. And this ended up being a teleport room and exploring different cool teleport effects for how the player would warp back into that room. And just other various Forerunner based interiors once we kind of got, this is a bit later, once we got into the groove of what we were after and could really just go to town, making very interesting Forerunner-based structures. And some of the exterior spaces, again, applying the same logic into patterns, forms, and shapes. Various interior spaces and underground spaces. Some other early successes where we just really drove home the pattern-heavy application on different hallways and interior spaces. Some exploration of the big palace in the distance that we kind of see in the game. I think over the course of the game, it sort of grows as the player progresses into this giant structure that we go to at the end, and just showing how that could look off in the distance. So one of the other things I wanted to cover was the main new enemy race in the game called the Harbinger. And it was fun to explore a new alien race and a new language that we could introduce into the franchise. This was some early exploration done by Daniel Chavez that was done before I arrived. And I think the whole team really loved what he did. It was just a very original looking direction that we hadn't quite seen before, but maybe the form was a little too alien at the moment. And so it was my job to kind of explore what this could be as a enemy, and refine some of the concepts and directions that Daniel and some of the other team had explored before I arrived. So these are some early examples for how I could take this new alien race to maybe be something more relatable, or just explore how we could turn this into a more defined character and enemy. So just some early sculptures and renderings in ZBrush, starting to push it into something a bit more sinister. And just, again, just exploring like different directions we could take this into. Just defining the overall anatomy at the beginning was maybe a bit more humanoid in this kind of tech suit, and some early explorations for how this armor could attach on to this new character. After some feedback with all the various departments and directors and Nicholas, we arrived at this final sculpt that I did for kind of a more sinister, aquatic looking, maybe almost squid look inspired forms, and some early pinovers and patterns for what we could potentially do for this character, and where she ended up in the final game. And detail passes after that are defining every little detail on a tech suit from kind of the ground up and inside out, of just defining all her armor pieces and really going to town detailing that for the 3D teams, and just figuring out how these shapes and pieces fit on, what's underneath, and all that good stuff. And where the final kind of armor went with her cloak, I think in the end we didn't have a cloak, but it was fun to explore all these different ideas, and where she ended up in the final game. And yeah, I think that's it for me, and I'll pass it on to Dave.
Sounds good. Thank you. Share over here. Is that showing up? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm David Heidloff. I'm a senior concept artist at 343. I actually started at 343 during Halo 5 as an intern, and then came back at the very, very end of Halo 5. And basically I've been on Halo since, for this whole Infinite project. On Infinite, I got to do a lot of different things. I did environments, characters, props, illustrations, and I'm very grateful for the variety. I know in art school, sometimes they say you should specialize in one thing, but this is maybe an example of that. You don't necessarily have to do that. And yeah, as a result, there are a ton of different things that I could show here, but since we're kind of running low on time, I'm just going to show a few highlights, starting with the Banished exploration. Some of this architecture had to be a completely new style. We haven't really seen any brute architecture in the past, and you saw a lot more of this in Glenn's style guide examples. I spent a lot of time on this, and this was before we kind of had our art direction pillars established, and we were still in kind of blue sky pre-production mode and just exploring. So we're trying to find a new setting, and looks for an enemy whose architecture we've basically never seen.
I think, David, I think it's because also we transitioned from having, the brutes just be a static force to an invading force, which implied that all the buildings had to be like very, mobile and had a lot of mobility implied when it comes to an assaulting force that would like land on a planet. So that came with time.
Yeah. So these were all still planned for when they would potentially be already settled on the planet or something like that, rather than becoming that invading force that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think wasn't Dave, like you were like looking at a lot of Reach stuff too back then, right?
Yeah, we were just trying to analyze what we could from the old games and pull like from vehicles and all kinds of stuff like that had been shown before. And then I moved on to the brute characters. This is a concept by Daniel. A lot of the brute kind of anatomy had already been fleshed out by both John and Daniel. So I did more of the exploration on the armor side. So this was one of the very early kind of sketches, trying to stay very loose and just finding something new that kind of stands apart from all the rest of the factions. Like you would be easily identifying these if you're fighting them, that they're a new enemy type. But after a while, again, we realized that we maybe had to lean a bit closer to Legacy Halo. So with help from Glenn, we pulled a lot of the previous Halo reference together and found that honestly, the brute design changed like crazy from game to game. Like even the anatomy changed a lot. And so we kind of tried to find a common thread in that and pulled out core themes. And kind of ended up with something like this in the end, where we also pulled a little bit more Halo Wars 2 influence in there with some of these thicker stacked plates. So because that was the last time the audience had seen the brutes in any Halo game. And from there, I have several drawings of just like stuff like this, right? Like paint overs over the model, figuring out what's under armor plates, because these can be shot off in the game so that you can damage them. Figuring out attachments and like all kinds of detail passes, like figuring out modular helmets for them, things like that. So that was an enemy to look at. Let's take a look at a friendly NPC. In this case, the weapon. So at the beginning, there was a pitch for her to be a lot younger than she is in the final game, since she was kind of a reboot of the Cortana archetype. And she had to kind of still find her place in the world, find out where she belonged. And so with these sketches, I was going for more than just like an outfit design or a character design. It was more about conveying like the character, the emotion, and maybe even her voice and how she would animate all in kind of one sketch, like her attitude and everything. And the iterations you see there on the right kind of led to what became her final design. So some of the major changes we strived for there was returning more to her being a hologram compared to Halo 5, where she felt a little bit more solid in this world. Way more transparency, again, just like in Legacy Halos. Giving her also clearly her wearing clothes, right? Like she's wearing this cadet uniform that was inspired by several Legacy Halo shorts, like Forward Unto Dawn, etc., and like other uniforms that we've seen before. So a few like patches and stripes that kind of define her form, and everything else is just transparent. And from there, we again did a lot of smaller feedback and drawovers. I worked a lot with Brian Repka there. He was the modeler on this, and we just went back and forth with a bunch of these small sketches, stuff like this. And then even shader notes later on for how we would translate this into the game, what the actual texture on her would look like, how much transparency is there, how much is there not, etc. All right, so we covered some characters. Another thing that I did a lot for this game were kind of these pitch artworks. So these we found to be an easy and quick tool to cheaply explain features that we would have in the game. So this was a way to communicate a lot in one image and quite easily. And it also artistically, I think, helped me find a style that I can, execute something quickly with. So that was kind of a breakthrough for me personally, because I hadn't done a lot of these before. I wasn't aware that they were necessarily a thing before I started at 343. And yeah, so some of the things that they helped us figure out were the narrative. So something like this, which is more of a cutscene type illustration or pitch artwork, but also MP modes or transition screens. Like this would be a kind of a mix of both figuring out some early customization for the game, but also what would be the fire team loading screen. What would that look like a menu screen? Ring functionality and gameplay was also another huge thing that we had to figure out. So these were not intended to kind of illustrate a specific place, but more to capture the feel of those moments and kind of the moments that you would experience. And some of the major problems we had to solve there were, what are the remnants of the unit C doing on the ring? So we have these crushed life pods and like all these human bases, like you saw earlier a little bit, like maybe they're ambushing brutes like in that picture before. And then also what cool places or kind of features does the ring have that we could explore? For example, what does the edge of the ring look like when you get to the border of it? Is the weather controlled by something, or is it all working organically like it would on Earth? What does the inside of the ring look like? What is the underbelly kind of laid out like? And would you find kind of this underlying building structure everywhere if you like scrape the dirt off and you find stuff like that? And then of course, because this ring was destroyed, we had to figure out the destruction. So this was a very, very early destruction pass, but obviously we veered a lot further away from this later on. So this was also, again, a lot of pre-production work. So we got characters, environments. I also did some props. So a quick one to go through is just one of the new shotguns, or the new shotgun. This started pretty stereotypical, like a weapon design would, with orthographics first to kind of find a direction that everybody can get behind, both art direction wise, but also gameplay wise. I think from this page we picked maybe 1 and 4, and from there we had to figure out how these would animate, how the engineering would work, and the best way to do that was in 3D at the time. So these were quick prototype models. You can like easily plot them into the engine, see what it looks like in first person with a field of view. So these were purposely loose to allow for kind of quick changes too. And this was then after a lot of refinements where we ended up. And for the final version, it then went back to kind of a 2D paint over that 3D to really flesh out all the details, little texture hints and labels, everything like that. And then again, a lot of paint overs on the final model with the modelers. Yeah, and with that, let's go to Molly for more of an MP focused dive.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. Hi, everybody. So I'm Molly. I started as an intern at 343 on Halo Infinite in 2019, and I've been working with the team ever since. It's been a great experience. I got to say, I love the whole team. And one of the biggest projects that I got to work on was the AI. So a lot of what all the other artists who have already previously talked about were super influential on my approach to the AI, in particular, the legacy and the simplification. So one of the first asks with the AI was to transform the superintendent into a 3D format for the AI in the game. And a lot of that comes down to keeping readability, being recognizable as legacy, and also being interesting and fun as in terms of like you would actually want to have an AI companion, or you would feel connection to it in a certain way. And so this was the page I ended up with the superintendent, and a lot of it was just about, how do I translate that flat 2D image into something that works in 3D and is very sort of expressive in a way that still keeps all of those elements that we talked about. And certain legacy elements stay in here too, like the plunger and like the thumbs up and things like that. Those are direct references to legacy. And part of the reason, or one of the important parts of choosing the superintendent was that so the superintendent also carried over into all the other AI. So the philosophy around the superintendent being a simplified form, which would be able to be like repeatable often, because in an MP setting, you have a lot of players who have a lot of AIs that they're loading. So keeping the forms simple and keeping them recognizable were like the big things, and that carried through all the other AI designs. And so here I'll just talk about, this was some of my exploration of like how to approach that through, or approach those things and get other forms out of it. So I was playing with the ideas of like using props or using customization and how we could implement that, as well as how do we have forms that, are simple enough to actually work in the game and to be recognizable and be readable, but also carry that emotion. Can I do push and pulls? Can I do form changes? Like, can I do a 3D form that meshes into other ones? Or just sort of the general idea of like exploring the bounds of like what I can do with the AI, because it is one of those things where there's a fair amount of limitation, not only in keeping things consistent, but also in tech limitations. And finding those boundaries is really important in terms of knowing where I can go and where I'm going to be steered away so that I can get the most successful design. So here was another page. This was also, again, thinking about how I could do emotions, how I could do other props. Could I do material changes across the same prop, or could I do materials in terms of having like an outer piece and an inner piece with the face overlaid on top? Things like that. Just sort of a lot of trying different ideas and seeing what works. And it's also a process of inspiring the people who work on these things further down on the production line, but also giving them a sense of what I need thinking, so that they can tell me, hey, no, we probably won't be able to do this, or we won't be able to do this with our budget at the time. And that sort of collaborative process as well, in terms of being able to make a design that works on my end and works further down the line. So this was the final for Cirque, and playing with her emotions and how I could capture that through this like simplified form, but also make it feel distinct as her own character. This was Fret. I had another fun one. This is Butler. This is Lumu. And then here I did a page. I was talking a little bit about earlier about communicating with the other teams, and the other artists on the team have also talked about that. And this was a big point about it, which was finding ways to present my ideas in a way that was readable and understandable with people further down the line. So I figured if I was going to present a series of emotions and a series of how these characters communicate with the outside world, I should do it in the medium of like actually animating the characters, so you can see how they would look going through all these things, rather than just giving them like a flip book. And so I basically took all the characters and I took all the emotions that I did, and I kind of put them together in this animation. And it also has to do with like presenting the character in that context of what I imagine the player would understand these characters as. And so from that, we'll go to a completely different thing. So like Dave was talking about, we have a lot of freedom, I think, in terms of what we get to do. And one of the more fun things we got to do was we were asked to do illustrations sort of as a companion piece to the game. And I thought it would be super fun to sort of create a companion illustration that mirrored the story that was presented in the season 1 cinematic. And so I really loved Agrina as a character, as a new character in Infinite. And I also really loved the cinematic and the story that I had to tell. And so a lot of the concept work was already done. And so it was just a lot about me referencing the ideas and the thought process behind what the characters were like. So this is the armor concept by Dave. And then this was the concept from Axis for the younger version of Agrina. And then I ended up with this image. And a lot of this image was a culmination of not only taking all the elements that came before this image in terms of the design, the narrative work, the story that was being told by this cinematic, but also finding a way to put them all together into a single companion image. And I will say another thing that I wanted to mention here was just how important using 3D was. Ben and Dave have both showed some of their 3D work, and in a collaborative sense of like working with my team, I found a lot of success with trying things out that they had talked about, or getting into certain programs and ideas that they had mentioned in terms of using Blender for production of images. And so using 3D here was like a great tool in terms of the iterative process of like doing the illustration where sometimes we get feedback or of can we change this, can we change this, and in a piece like this where I have two dynamically moving characters, being able to really quickly iterate on pose and composition and things like that was super helpful in terms of creating a successful image in the end that basically satisfied everybody on the team. And yeah, I had a great time doing this, and we're a little slow or we're a little late on time, but I'm going to kick it off to Darren, who's going to be much more in depth on all the MP art. Thanks.
Thanks, Molly. That was awesome. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a Molly Gang hashtag in the chat.
Oh my goodness. We need to start Darren Gang though. Get that going.
I don't know if we told you, but we don't use Zoom very often. Share screen. Share. All good?
Yeah, works fine.
All right, yeah, so hey, I'm Darren Bacon, Associate AD. So I work really close with all these people, but Nick and another artist who couldn't be here today, Martin Deschambeau. And so this image here is a piece I worked on with Martin. So like Martin painted the background and I was adding in a foreground in a vehicle. And because we're showing concept art today, I found the piece that's missing the VFX. So later on, like we added like effects to the Pelican so that it looked less like exhaust and more like a you know, what you'd see in the games. All right, so Nick covered a lot of what pre-production was like, and so I included some of those pieces in here. There was quite a bit of it, and as we were sort of like finding our footing on what the next Halo was going to be, and so I included some of those examples. And here's more, and like this was one where it's like, hey, here's a similar idea with completely different execution because we were just trying to like hone in on something. And we explored a lot of different palettes, and that was just like a time of exploration to try to find things that felt really, you know, trying to like find our voice as like classic legacy Halo, but in a contemporary way. And here is like a piece that was done on board the Infinity. It's like Pelicans are headed off into space. And this was another piece. I think this piece wound up in a book, but it was just sort of like some out there like concept for, you know, expanded Halo universe. And we also did, this was a piece that I worked really closely with Nick on. We were trying to kind of nail down like rendering ideas and its potential rendering targets, and so it was yeah, just kind of like a kind of a keyframe execution piece. And this also was ended up using for some expanded fiction in the Halo universe. And then jumping back into more art that was, you know, very pre-production-y and blue sky as sort of like a crazy Banished structure. So earlier David Adolph shared his Banished like architecture, and like this was literally me taking a piece of it and putting it in the middle. So thanks, David.
No worries.
And yeah, this is just again the same idea, right? Trying to find some, you know, legacy Halo stuff, make it feel like contemporary and modern day. I threw this in here. I probably won't go through the whole thing because we don't have tons of time, but we did this, you know, game engine demo, the Halo Infinite reveal trailer in 2018. And so I worked on the storyboards of the animatic, and that guided a lot of concepts. So like I would hand these, we had another concept artist, Espen Sadervik, and he was painting these. You would take these concept boards and then paint them really high res, or, you know, paint beautiful pictures of them. And then we would take them back to the team and execute an engine. So then this is getting, again, more into like blue sky Halo stuff. This starts to kind of pivot back to more what Halo Infinite ended up looking like in the final form. And again, this is around the same time, but very blue sky. You know, wouldn't it be neat if we were, you know, we were doing all this crazy sandbox stuff. And then this piece is jumping into, again, more of like what's actually shipping in Halo Infinite. Nick and I were talking a lot about like what these sort of broken pieces had done. In Halo Wars 2, the artists had sort of executed some of these canyons and stuff. And so I believe that Jan Urschel was doing a lot of that stuff, and we were looking at that.
I think that's one of the pieces where we were like, okay, we have now a more refined version of how is the ring either crumbling or detaching, you know, and we, for the indestructible Forerunner structures, we not wanting to go into shearing and breaking things in a way that would just not have any type of math combined and math implied. So when you did that concept, we're like, hey, this is how you could really have these crazy verticals where there would be soil and earth on top, and it just made a lot of sense, you know, and we actually just pushed with this one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think we had done a bunch of versions of this too. Like,
oh yeah.
And then, yeah, I included this piece. This is what ended up shipping as the Aquarius map. It's an early concept piece that we could probably do a whole panel on this map. Because I think the original concept was done by John Wallen, like way back, right?
Yeah, 5 still.
I don't want to just exaggerate here, but I sincerely believe that you've done at least 6 to 8 final rendered version of that specific map view, which was bonkers, because the week after I was like, oh, that's a very new concept. Oh, no, that's the same concept, but fully rebuilt and revamped. It was fascinating.
Yeah, and there's new ones too. I didn't even find them, but there's new ones that.
Like 6 to 8 is not even exaggerated. I think that's about right.
Yeah. And then I threw in some, it's the skimmer is a shipping name. We were calling it the hover concepts that were done. This was sort of like, you know, a rough idea of what it could be. And then
it's another one where we could have a full book out of these. So
yeah, we could do another talk if Nucleus wants to have us back. And so you know, the previous sheets are the ones that basically a sketch that I had done, and then Nick Sparth did the one on the left, which is sort of like a, you know, banishified version, and you know, he had a bunch of ideas on how to work on that thing. And then I did these model sheets on the right. I think I did those. It was a while ago. Oh yeah, pretty sure I did those. So yeah, this was the soccer rifle. So this is early concept stuff where, you know, we'd get design blockouts. I think I did an initial sketch, and then we did a design blockout, and then we started to do high res things. And I don't know if Glenn has any input, but I was basically using Glenn's Covenant kit, because Glenn like has basically made Covenant stuff into like a kit form, and so it was pretty cool. I just sort of move bits around to find this and work over the model.
And you nailed it.
All right. I don't know if Isaac thinks so. Yeah, and so here's just, you know, detail pass showing modelers how we could sort of solve different details for like venting with like the reloading mechanism. And then this last bit is a whole bunch of sort of visual target pieces. So this is like a paint over of a screenshot, and like there was the screenshot, there's the paint over, and then I organized these a bit, but like then this is kind of closer to what the shipping image was looking like. Here again in the UI, like trying to hit specific things and try to improve things with lighting and effects. And there's quite a few, so I'll go fast. But yeah, this is sort of like, this was basically like once we move out of the concept phase, right, then it's like, how do we go execute this stuff in game?
Yeah, it's in a way, it's not because it's done in concept. Afterwards, there's a crazy amount of photo ops and paint overs to really just make sure that that the final product is just going to be actually up to the expectations, right?
Yeah, a lot of us end up with folders of this stuff, right? Where it's like on the left, you have to do a quick paint over, and on the right is like what the map looks like shipping. Yeah, like I think Nick and I, like we talked quite a bit for you know, back and forth about how we were solving this floor and the wall, and you can see even in the shipping thing, there was a different treatment for like the lighting. And then this is moving into some paint overs that were on the Bazaar map, and trying to get some of the like, literal Halo 2 buildings into the map, and we're trying to make it feel more like New Mombasa. And then this is the same treatment as the previous slides, where it's like, hey, here's like a before, and like on the top right is a paint over to be like, this is what it could look like. And then the bottom is like the execution in game, and this should be game.
There's also the shotgun in game, and then I just noticed.
Oh yeah, there's a shotgun. Yep, there's a shotgun, folks. Yeah. What else do I have in here? Oh yeah, and so then blueprint, like this was another thing, right? So we had, how could we just add more interest in this knockback death pit? And this was a pass on that map of ways to add more graphic signage. And then moving really quick into the MP Viz ID key art, we've got a sketch on the left and the final. This is our reference, things we're going after, working with marketing. We had internal like animators like Marcellus posed all these characters and did tons of tweaks, and we would comp it together and we'd all look at it and talk about it, pick codings that we're going to ship in the season and organize them in a way that made sense. And then it was done, and there was even more paint overs, like you can see in this animated GIF, as ways to add more kind of grit, halo-ness to it. And then this is the final project, or the shipping piece, right? Like at Gamescom. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow me on social at _Darren Bacon. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
There you go.
Always like and subscribing.
All right,
That was
now
great.
I gotta stop sharing.
That was great. Thank you all for sharing so much. It was really, really informative. And I think myself and everybody else watching, I think, learned a lot just from that presentation. We do have about roughly 15 minutes left to do Q&A, if that's something we want to jump into. Yeah. So the first question that I have was, there was a lot of research into the past Halo games for driving the inspiration of what this new Halo Infinite would look like. But during pre-production, were there any other real-world references that outside of the Halo franchise that you guys were sort of referencing when doing designs? Like, where did you begin finding your ideas?
I can take this one. I think that everything is still, like 90% of it is still grounded into Halo. Of course, it's always interesting, Halo is all about describing a lot of worlds that don't exist. However, and this is an interesting one that shows that that question is valid. What I mean is that there's still a lot of things that we are going to be referencing from what happens on planet Earth. And actually, I've got a bit of an interesting anecdote on that. When we worked on past maps that were actually very alien, the more something is alien, the less relatable it is when it comes to a universe that actually is relatable to a player. And if you go into a map that literally looks like you are living in Alice in Wonderland on acid, then basically it's just not going to work out, because the players would just be kind of really detracted by everything going around. So that means that no matter what, the funny and the irony of the whole thing is that a faraway world on an alien planet always needs to actually have some references that are going to be very human and very much like sun-centric in terms of lighting, for example. So it's always a bit of a trick here, because we want to escape very far away, but our own reference and the whole thing we refer to and that we actually feel comfortable into are going to be things that are very connected and grounded into Earth environments. So to answer to that question, yes, there were a lot of reference connected to places in Iceland, for example, places in the Pacific Northwest, as you can see in game. It's actually very connected and very grounded into everything we do. We wanted to go back to the roots of where that game originated to, and it's actually a very Northwest, North American and Pacific Northwest oriented type of visual and philosophy when it comes to these trees, when it comes to a bit of the weather, when it comes to all that. So we wanted to really have that too.
That's great. Does anybody else have any?
Yeah, I just want to, like, for characters and for a lot of the early Brood designs and stuff like that, I would say almost like the majority of it was pulled from not Halo stuff, right? Like you need things like materials that weren't like in Halo 2, the technology for displaying like corroded metal just wasn't quite there yet compared to like what we can now have, like the results that we can achieve now. So like looking at material references, lighting references, also like different ways things are constructed in the real world and stuff is also always very, very important. And it does add that relatability that we were really after, I think, in this game. Yeah, to make the player feel grounded in like in a real world.
I think just to add something about what I was saying earlier, it's interesting how with Glenn and you guys, we've had constant chats about finding places on Earth that don't look like Earth, basically. That's what we've done for months and months and months. And in pre-prod, it's basically what is the most out there stuff that we can find on Earth that is actually real. And it was a way for us to kind of proof test and have tangible things that we could use, but that would still be super distant and very alien. That really tells you a lot about how much relatability we need in game for the players. Because if we go in a system where you really literally have 5 cents and that everything is looking purple, I can assure you that the relatability and the fun factor would go down big time.
See, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you wanted to push for a more grounded sense, just to make it a little more relatable for everybody. I think, like you said, that's super important when introducing more of these alien ideas. Another question would be, how music seems to be a large portion of the game. Is there any sort of interaction between the art team and the sound designers or the musicians part of the game? Like, do you work on art first and then sound comes later, or are they interwoven anyhow? Like, is there anything involved in that?
We're pretty independent from the sound department, although we did have a long-standing foosball rivalry with a member of the sound department. Hello, Robbie.
I think for certain things on the the enemy, the Harbinger, I remember coming up with like ideas. Like I don't think we really worked a ton, like the rest of the guys said, but like I was thinking, like, what if it made these strange sounds, and I would try to find reference for how it made sounds or how the mouth would move and talk. But I'm not sure I think we ended up just she sort of like the grunts, like we hear English language translated through Chief's helmet or whatever while she's talking, and not like some crazy weird sounds or anything.
You have a production separation that does exist between imagery on one side and sound on the other, and it's true. There are a lot of underlying themes that have gone through all the work that these guys have done when it comes to sounds and music and everything connected to audio. But it's true that when you look at the production cycle, very often what happens is that the pre-production happens and the concept art and pre-production curve happens first, and then goes down to production, and then less and less. But very often and sometimes very unfortunately in terms of production, everything connected to audio comes at the very last moment, which is, it's one of the challenges we always try to overcome in production, which is how can we loop in sound design, music, and everything as early as possible, even when so anything effects related in terms of sound, everything. So the game here is to bring as early as possible everything connected to sound and audio as early as possible in production, which has always been a challenge.
Yeah, I remember some of the early soundtrack explorations for what the brute stuff would sound like, really inspiring me at the time. I think there's also a difference between like the composing kind of the soundtrack versus making sounds for what the footsteps sound like on mud in this specific level, or so there were some early like more inspirational kind of compositions that we listened to and inspired us, but I do think overall probably the art came first, and then the sound was trying to match the art or improve the art.
Got it. So so the art sort of provides the initial direction, and then it's sort of working in harmony from there as things develop. That's cool. That's cool. This is a question more directed towards Glenn in terms of like the style guides. Somebody was curious of how that sort of information was shared. Is it are these in a digital format like a PDF and sent around, or is it part of one format that everybody comes together and then discusses? How is that sort of?
There's a couple of different ways. There's a macro style guide that Darren assembled that has like the high level overview of every style, and that's available on the network. And then there's an individual folder for each of these separate style guides. And that also includes all of the foundational reference. And since the game has shipped, I've tried to update that so that all of the finalized infinite assets are also included in there. So when we go and continue to update the style guide, all of that information is in kind of like a one-stop shop. It gets disseminated out in different ways, but like anybody who needs to find it can find it pretty readily through just network addresses.
And as you're saying, these are living documents, and which just make them as living documents. They are organically evolving within the needs that we have, and obviously sometimes we just like freeze them and we just go to something else depending on projects. But in that case, there's quite some evolution actually necessary and requested.
Got it. Yeah, thank you for answering. Somebody else was looking to ask, what was the design intent behind using hexagonal pillars to fill out the artificial segments of the halo, rather than using more, I guess what we would call recognizable structures, walls, and frameworks? Was that a limitation of the hardware, or was it more of a visual aesthetic that you were sort of going for?
Can I jump in here real quick? There's a video online called Hexagons Are the Bestagons, which I highly recommend. It extols the virtues of why like the hexagon is such a like compelling and useful shape for construction. It digs down into bees and mathematics, volume, and so on. That certainly inspired me, but the idea of using hexagons for Halo rings actually goes all the way back to Halo 4, with some of the initial style guide work that I did on that project. And it's kind of like been lurking in the background ever since. I think that it really started to land when we started experimenting with those brushes in the images that Nick showed during his presentation, where it kind of like coalesced as like, wow, like this isn't only sort of thematically interesting, it's visually striking and is worth exploring in greater detail. Did anybody else have anything to say on that?
Well, obviously, we should just never use too much of the good things. And hexagons is just a bit of that thing where obviously we've always been a bit in love with this. There's always controversies connected to the use of hexagons when it comes to overdoing it, all that stuff. But it's true that we should just not like stop using like specific patterns just for any type of trendy reasons or whatever. I think that basically this was just grounded into some of the DNA of Halo like deep down, and so we've been continuing to just play with it. It's like a mathematical unit, you just play with this. It's just like a very generic shape that can be having quite a lot of interest depending on how it's just built and assembled. And so we was just not shying away from using it.
Yeah, I think a big reason for us using a structure like that, whether it's hexagons or something else, was the underlying principle. I think that Forerunner kind of metals don't get destroyed, they get disassembled into their parts, right? And then they can drift back together and form bigger structures again. So I think we just had to find a visual language that kind of communicates that.
I think another component too is I think that like it was really design friendly, and so when design, it was like, oh, art likes this, like.
I mean, when you look at it, the hexagon is just perfect combination between a square and a circle. What I mean is that at one point it's a very interconnected pattern that has a lot of use and a lot of purpose when it comes to any type of gameplay. It's not just the reason it's also used in a lot of board games. It's because it is just a specific epitome of interconnection and interconnectivity, and that's why it's always been used.
Yeah, so it's like gameplay friendly.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Thanks for that great answer. Were there any unused locations in the concept art that you would like to revisit? That you thought, oh, it'd be super cool to see it in this direction, and then the game went in towards the Pacific Northwest. But is there anything that you would love to revisit?
That is a question that crosses some boundaries that we just can't really cross ourselves, obviously, because it is the fact that there's a lot of things that we want to do on Halo Infinite, and there's a lot of things that are planned. This is one of these questions that is just not easy to answer to. At a personal level, we do have a lot of preferences into all the pre-production era and stuff that we've done, but that's all we can say.
Yeah.
Yeah. No problem.
Personally, I'd like to see all of them, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the
Everything.
real world, unfortunately.
Everything.
Fair enough. No problem. I think we have time for probably one or two more questions. If anybody in the chat wants to drop a question, feel free, relating to like the art and visual design directions. But I would be interested to hear about sort of, you guys talked a lot about the transition between, identifying design elements of past Halo games and sort of reimagining, the recent Halo games like 4 and 5. Was there anywhere in between that where you were able to find like opportunities to introduce 343's new like direction of what your guys' vision of Halo Infinite is, if that makes sense?
Brendan,
I think so.
Oh, go
There's
ahead.
definitely
I
some
was gonna
sneaky
say.
things. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like in the Harbinger, like I would say that's a new race that it's like us being able to explore and like try something new. I think so. That was a fun opportunity to introduce a little bit of something new into the franchise, and that was fun to figure out what that might be and where we could potentially how that could fit into things as a bigger whole.
Well, all the Banished architecture too.
Yeah, that as well.
Also, like temporary UNSC stuff on the ring, I thought was really something that hadn't really been there. That was fun to explore.
I mean, basically, let's put it this way: when it comes to a bit of that transition and that evolution towards what Halo Infinite represented, basically, it's true that I remember having discussions with Doug Xiang back in 2016, who actually has a very heavy role on anything connected to Star Wars. And it's true that at one point when these guys did Rogue One, they really just nailed it. They nailed it in the best way possible, which is a true labor of love and a very Star Wars centric project that actually showed everything from music to sequencing to narrative. Everything was connected to a deeper understanding of the trilogy from 78 to 83, basically. And as a result, it just went back to that era, and it just worked like crazy. And it worked, to my opinion, worked better than all the previous films that actually were out. And with these discussions where they were like, "Yeah, we really did that as an intent," it really just like we got inspired by this. At one point, I had a bit of that sentence, and I forgot who said that, but at one point we're saying, who would be wanting to be putting like wings on Darth Vader? Darth Vader doesn't have any wings, so why would we want to like change things so much to the point where you would actually have a franchise just not recognizable? That being said, again, it's just not to bash Halo 4 and 5 like people think we do. We don't, and we're still insanely proud of everything we've done here. The franchise is an evolution and it's a very organic process, no matter what. But it's true that for Halo Infinite, we just like put quite a few stakes in the ground when it comes to saying, hey, now we do have a specific amount of assets on the franchise that we have been like introducing in many games. we are going to try to have more consistency when it comes to showing everything that has been existing on the franchise in the past. And then when it comes to anything new, then we do have free reign and like a lot of range to just create a lot of new things that might smartly integrate the franchise for the better general use. But everything that exists should have a minimum amount of cosmetic and aesthetic changes depending on gameplay, but everything connected to the bulk of our characters and the continuity of everything that has been done on that franchise, we need to be way more focused on keeping that world something accurate in order for the players and for the fans to be understanding what it is. Because when you change the Scorpion, like we've done on Halo 5 to the point, and we love the new one, and it was just done jointly with a lot of different gameplay intent. So all that stuff is, again, super organic, but at the same time, at the end, we had a very different product that we still called the Scorpion. So fans were sort of lost, and they were like, hey, if you actually have a very different vehicle, call it another name. So there were, maybe it was just like an MK something else, I forgot, but it's true that we want to just have more consistency moving forward and express that for the fans.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that in-depth answer. We are at time. It is 2:30, so that'll conclude the Q&A section. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everybody on Twitch for joining us, and especially our panelists, Sparth, Darren, Ben, Glenn, David, and Molly for spending their time with Gallery Nucleus. I've learned a lot, and the whole presentation was very informative. Please be sure to check out Halo Infinite and tell your friends to play it. I'm sure there's a lot more in store for the future of the game. I just want to say thank you for everybody again, and have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.